What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here, and I am here once again to examine another issue of X-Men. Today, I am examining X-Men issue 4, written by Stan Lee, with pencils by Jack Kirby, inks by Paul Reinman, and letters by Art Simek. In this issue, we are introduced to the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. We have Quicksilver, his sister Scarlet Witch, the Mastermind, and Toad. These guys are all working with Magneto, and they steal a freighter and take over a small third-world country, and then Professor X takes the X-Men to this country, and he has the brilliant idea of sending the X-Men to storm Magneto's castle one at a time, and then they all get taken out by the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, and then Professor X senses a booby-trapped door with a bomb attached to it, and he throws himself on the door, and then somehow loses his telepathic powers, and that is where we end this issue. This is kind of a big step for the X-Men. We are introduced to several big names who will be big for the X-Men for years to come. I would say the least important character that we are introduced here is Mastermind, who does become very important during the events of the Dark Phoenix saga. So it's not that he's an unimportant character, it's just that he's less important than the others. We also have Toad, who admittedly doesn't really do a whole lot throughout the years. He's always kind of a second banana to other characters. He did at one time have his own Brotherhood of Mutants in the 90s, but right now he's basically just Smithers to Mr. Burns for Magneto. He very much is wanting to please Magneto and make him happy in any way that he can, and Magneto doesn't really care about Toad at all. And then we have Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, who are not very important in the world of the X-Men, but they will later become very important in the world of the Avengers. And they are reluctant supervillains. They are only working with Magneto because he saved their lives somewhere in Europe, and we do not know that they are Magneto's children at this time. That's something that, I think I mentioned this a few days ago, that is something that we will not find out again for like 20 years. We won't know that they are his children for a while. Right now, all we know is that they don't really agree with Magneto's philosophy that Homo sapiens are scum of the earth and that mutants should rule the planet, but they are working with him because he saved their lives, or at least he saved Scarlet Witch's life. And also, she apparently got her name because these people thought that she was a witch when she was actually a mutant. Later on in the Avengers, probably around the 1980s, she did have sorcery powers, so that's another retcon that comes out much later. But anyway, it's interesting to see supervillains who are reluctantly doing what they are doing. That is a very new concept in the 60s. We don't even have reluctant superheroes in the 60s, really. It's much later before we get the archetype of a character who doesn't really want to do what they're doing, but they do it because they have to. That's something that won't come about for a while. So it's very interesting to see reluctant supervillains working with Magneto, basically because they feel like they owe him a debt. And Quicksilver's personality, just right out the gate, it is very much the personality that he will have for the rest of time. He's very arrogant, very hot-headed and loud-spoken. Unfortunately, Scarlet Witch, in the same way that Jean Grey is the token female of the X-Men, she is basically just a girl. She doesn't really have a whole lot of powers here, or a whole lot of, I'm sorry, not powers. She doesn't have a whole lot of personality here. All the other members of the Brotherhood, they at least have something going for them. Mastermind is really creepy, and he flirts with Scarlet Witch, and everybody thinks that it's weird. Toad, he's a sycophant. Magneto is loud and angry. Quicksilver is loud and angry, but in a different way. So it's very interesting that all these guys have a personality trait of some kind, except for the Scarlet Witch. Quicksilver also claims that he does not believe in Magneto's philosophy, or he claims that he does believe in Magneto's philosophy, but then at the same time, at the end of the issue, Magneto leaves a nuclear bomb that's going to destroy the country, and Quicksilver is the one who disarms it. And so we can already see seeds that he is not really all that bad, even though he claims that he doesn't like humanity, and when Cyclops tries to convince him to come join the X-Men, or at least not go with Magneto, Quicksilver says, no, I'm still going to go with Magneto, and I don't think that he even explains that Magneto saved Scarlet Witch's life. So he still feels like he owes a debt to Magneto, even though he is not in line with him. So very interesting there, I think. So meanwhile, I'm curious if this issue, in having Professor X lose his telepathic powers at the end, I'm curious if they did that as a response to the previous two issues. In issue 2 and issue 3, Professor X used his telepathy to defeat the Vanisher and the Blob, respectively. And I'm wondering if the creative team realized that that was becoming a pattern, and so they wanted to break it by having Professor X lose his powers in this explosion. And it's really weird that the explosion doesn't hurt him physically, but it does make him lose his powers somehow. It's also weird that he was able to sense a bomb with his telepathy. I would think telepathy, you can sense a mind. You could sense somebody nearby who knows that there's a bomb there. You could hear a stray thought and say, hey, there's a bomb behind that door. But you wouldn't be able to sense the bomb itself, which is what he is able to do. So we can still see that they don't fully have a handle on the character's powers yet. There was a few issues ago where Cyclops used his force beams to melt ice off of Angel's wings, and that's something that he would not be able to do, say, 10 or 15 years later. Professor X's mind powers here are kind of just very ill-defined. He can do whatever the story needs him to do with his telepathy until he loses his powers. So it's going to be very interesting in the next issue, getting to see the X-Men have to basically stand on their own. They're not going to have Professor X to kind of hold them up, because even in issue 1, where he did not use his telepathy against Magneto, he was still guiding them while they were in the field. So it's going to be very interesting to see them have to operate on their own without his assistance. And also, the X-Men themselves, their personalities don't really get any further development, although we did get quite a bit of development on a few of them in the previous issue. So we can't expect them to keep developing these characters, especially at the rate that they would be developed today, because a lot of these characters are going to remain fairly 1- and 2-dimensional for a while before they get more development in the years to come. But we do get a little bit more soap operatic stuff. I've mentioned before that the X-Men series is known for being a soap opera with superheroes, especially when you get into the Bronze Age, and we get a little bit of that here with Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch reluctantly working with Magneto, but they don't really want to. And I'm curious if Magneto had the Brotherhood formed when he took over Cape Citadel in issue 1, because he did that by himself, and if he had the Brotherhood standing by somewhere, you have to wonder, why did he bring them with him whenever he took over Cape Citadel? Because at the beginning of this issue, Professor X, he gets out a cake, and he says it's the 1-year anniversary of teaching this class of X-Men. And I wonder, does that mean it's been 1 year since he took in Cyclops, who was his technically his first student, or has it been 1 year since Jean joined in issue 1? Because this series is bi-monthly, so it's been, I guess, 8 months since issue 1 came out, and maybe they're just kind of fudging it a little bit and saying this has been 1 year that the X-Men have been fighting crime, or it's been 1 year since Professor X started teaching Cyclops, and then he eventually recruited Iceman, Bobby, Warren, Hank, and Jean. I don't know, but that's not really made clear. So if it's been 1 year since Jean Grey joined the team, then it's been a full year since they fought Magneto, and then that would mean that he's had plenty of time to recruit these other guys, like Toad, Mastermind, Quicksilver, and Scarlet Witch. But I do believe there was an issue in the 90s. It was one of those -1 issues where they did a whole bunch of them, like a -1 issue for every series that was coming out at that time. And in one of those issues, Professor X and Magneto kind of had a little meeting together. It was right before Magneto officially became a full-blown supervillain, but he was still wearing this costume, and they basically were just trying to have a discussion, but at that point it was way too late for them to come to any sort of agreement. But I believe that Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch were with Magneto in that issue, and if that issue is to be taken as canon, and I see no reason why it wouldn't be, then in that case, Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch were allied with Magneto as of the events of issue 1 of X-Men, but for some reason he didn't have them with him whenever he was taking over the base. I have a theory that maybe Stan Lee and Jack Kirby intended for Magneto to have recruited all of these guys after the events of issue 1 and before this issue. But anyway, this is an exciting little development, if you will, because it forces the X-Men to actually be the protagonists of this series, which is something that they kind of haven't been for the last 2 issues. So I'm excited, and it also introduces some characters who are going to be pretty important in the years to come in X-Men and also just the Marvel Universe in general. So I think that that's all that I have to say. Not really, well, I guess I could talk a little bit about how Magneto takes over this foreign nation and then is using human soldiers to do his bidding. That's very interesting since Magneto hates humans and he believes that he is over humans, and I guess it works because they are working for him. They are doing his bidding, but it's still very interesting that he's even using human soldiers at all. I would think that even just this small group of Brotherhood of Mutants, that they would be able to take over this country without any human beings helping them at all. At one point, Mastermind uses an illusion of soldiers, and it looks very jackbooted, stormtrooper-esque. It looks a whole lot like Nazis marching, and I've seen other people mention that before, that in this issue these soldiers look a lot like Nazis, and how it's very clear that they A, did not have any intention of Magneto being a Holocaust survivor at this time, and B, that they were not intending for Magneto to be the Malcolm X to Professor X's Martin Luther King Jr. And that's pretty clear when you read these issues. Malcolm X was never this fanatical. Malcolm X never had any sort of hatred towards Martin Luther King Jr. They did meet each other, and they did have very different philosophies, but they did not openly oppose each other like Magneto and Professor X do here. So even though Stan Lee will always say, or has always said, that Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X were the source of inspiration for these two characters, it's pretty clear that that's not the case when you read issues like this one, where he has soldiers marching around the country, and that's not really how Malcolm X operated. But anyway, he has these humans working for him, and it seems a little out of character. That doesn't seem like something that Magneto would do, even in the 70s. Whenever you look at some of his appearances before some of his backstory was revealed, like Holocaust survivor and friends with Charles Xavier, that wasn't something that he would have done. It seems like that was beneath him, almost. So we're still seeing them try to figure out Magneto's personality here, and trying to figure out what he would and would not do. But at this time, Magneto feels a lot more like the Red Skull and Doctor Doom, just very loud, boisterous supervillains who don't really feel unique from each other just yet. It will take several years for these characters to all feel different, and you could look at something and say, that's not something that Doctor Doom would do, but it is something that Red Skull would do, and that's not something that Magneto would do, etc. But anyway, I don't think I have anything else to talk about here. I will be talking about the next issue, where the X-Men are going to have to figure out what's going on. What are they going to do without Professor X's help? That will be issue 5, and I'll be talking about that in a day or two. And in the meantime, consider this issue examined.